They called him untouchable, a man of steel who built an empire with algorithms and ruthless decisions. Hudson Vale was the kind of billionaire who turned entire markets with a single glance. His suits were immaculate, his reputation was colder than the boardrooms he ruled, and his wealth was supposed to shield him from chaos. But behind the polished glass walls of his San Francisco mansion, chaos came in the form of 5 daughters, all born on the same day, crying in unison, each demanding more than money could ever buy. Hudson thought problems could be solved with cash. He hired armies of nannies, each one carefully selected with glowing resumes and perfect etiquette. Yet one by one they walked away. Some said the children were too demanding. Others whispered the house was haunted by grief since their mother's death. In truth, no one lasted because raising 5 infant girls required more than skill. It required devotion, and devotion was something money could not purchase. When the last nanny slammed the door shut, only one figure remained: Eliot Frost. He was not from an agency, not from Hudson's world of privilege. He was a young man, openly gay, with quiet resilience and calloused hands from years of service jobs. He had been hired as an assistant, a background shadow, expected to fetch groceries, polish silver, and vanish when real staff entered. But when the cries of the girls pierced the silence, Eliot stayed. He learned their rhythms, their tiny fists, the way one needed humming before sleep, while another only calmed when pressed close to a heartbeat. Nights became endless. Eliot paced the marble floors with bottles balanced in one hand, lullabies murmured in the other. There was no applause, no acknowledgement, only exhaustion that seeped into his bones. One night, as the storm of parenting reached its peak, Hudson returned late from a gala. He expected to find his daughters in chaos, but instead the scene stopped him cold. In the nursery, Eliot lay collapsed on the rug, back pressed to the floor, eyes closed in a stolen moment of rest. All 5 girls were draped across his chest, breathing in perfect harmony, their tiny fingers clutching at his shirt as if clinging to the only anchor they trusted. Hudson's first instinct was fury. In his world, image was everything. A servant sleeping on the job was unforgivable. He reached for his phone, ready to summon security, ready to dismiss Eliot before dawn. But a flash interrupted. Outside the tall window, a paparazzi lens had caught the moment. The next morning, headlines screamed across glossy magazines: "Billionaire hands his daughters to gay servant." The world erupted in mockery. Commentators called it negligence. Online mobs ridiculed Hudson for trusting a gay nobody. But Hudson Vale, a man who had silenced shareholders and crushed rivals, said nothing. He chose silence, not to defend Eliot, not to protect him, but to protect his own fragile brand. In that silence, Eliot became the scapegoat. He bore the weight of a world's cruelty, mocked as a parasite, reduced to a scandal he had not chosen. Yet hidden beneath the ridicule lay a secret neither Hudson nor the public could see. The man dismissed as just a gay servant carried a truth that would one day shatter the Vale empire itself. Because sometimes life hides its greatest revelations in the bodies of those we overlook. And sometimes the ones humiliated in the public square are the very people carrying the bloodline that cannot be erased. This was only the beginning of Eliot Frost's story. A story not of wealth, but of love tested by fire, of ridicule turned into revelation. And if you stay with Hart's story until the end, you will see how one man's silence became another man's redemption, and how family can be born from the most unexpected places. The lesson hidden even here is that appearances deceive, reputations crumble, but what children need most is not power or wealth. It is the presence of someone who refuses to walk away. The headlines did not fade. Instead, they multiplied, passed from one gossip column to another, amplified by late-night hosts and social feeds that thrived on cruelty. The gay servant who thinks he's a father, Vale's empire babysat by a nobody. Each cruel headline chipped away at Eliot Frost's dignity. Wherever he walked, eyes followed, judging, mocking. People whispered in cafes. Drivers smirked when dropping him near the mansion. Even the grocery clerks offered pity disguised as politeness. Yet inside the house, His routine never faltered. While Hudson Vale withdrew into strategy meetings and shareholder calls, Eliot carried on. He rose before dawn, sterilized bottles, washed tiny clothes by hand, memorized the differences in each child's cry. One daughter tugged her ear when she grew restless. Another clenched her fists in stubborn silence before breaking into a storm of tears. Eliot knew each signal by heart. What the world dismissed as menial work was in truth a profound bond built through sleepless nights and quiet devotion. But the ridicule wore him down. He avoided screens, silenced his phone, refused to open magazines. Each insult was a reminder that he was viewed not as a caregiver, but as an aberration, tolerated only until replaced. The loneliness pressed heavily on him, threatening to hollow him out. Then came the day of the checkup. The mansion chauffeur had canceled, so Eliot himself bundled the girls into car seats and drove through the city to the pediatric clinic. He kept his head low in the waiting room, aware of stares that lingered a little too long. When the doctor called them in, Eliot steadied himself for the usual measurements and observations. But midway through the examination, the physician paused, brows furrowed. He scrolled back through the medical records, comparing notes and test results. Finally, with professional curiosity rather than accusation, he asked, "Are you related to these children? The genetic markers here, there's a level of similarity that's unusual." Eliot's chest tightened. His voice caught before he forced himself to answer, "No, I'm just their caretaker." But inside, something cracked open. Memories returned unbidden nights years earlier when he was a college student, desperate for tuition money, standing in a sterile clinic room, signing papers for anonymous donation. He had walked away telling himself it meant nothing, that those contributions vanished into the system, never to be traced. Yet now, with 5 little girls clinging to him every day, the puzzle fit together with chilling clarity. The truth struck like lightning. These were not only the daughters of a billionaire's late wife, they were his own flesh, his own blood. The cries he soothed at midnight, the small hands that clutched his shirt, the eyes that looked up with trust, those were his children in the truest biological sense. Eliot left the clinic in silence, pushing the stroller as the city hummed indifferently around him. The revelation burned through him, equal parts wonder and devastation. For years, he had lived with the ache of exclusion, told by strangers he had no right to be near these girls. Now he carried the unbearable secret that he was not just their caregiver, but their father. The weight was suffocating. If he spoke, he risked being accused of manipulation, of inventing a story to secure a place in the Vale fortune. If he stayed silent, he denied the truth of his own bloodline. Alone in the nursery that night, Eliot pressed his forehead against the crib and let the tears come, not from weakness, but from the impossible burden of holding love that had no name, no recognition, no permission to exist. What the world did not understand was that fatherhood is not always declared on paper. It is lived in the rhythm of care, in the unseen sacrifices, in the relentless choice to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Eliot's discovery was not only about biology, it was about the undeniable truth that children recognize the heart that beats for them, long before they recognize titles or wealth. And sometimes, society's loudest voices mocking, judging, condemning are wrong, because family is not built by public approval. It is carved quietly in the moments when love proves itself real, even when no one else is watching. The gossip did not quiet down. It evolved into venom. What began as mockery sharpened into suspicion. Online forums painted Eliot Frost as a schemer who had somehow maneuvered his way into Hudson Vale's household. Tabloids splashed photos of him cradling the children across glossy pages with captions dripping in sarcasm, "The servant who thinks he's dad." Others whispered that he was using the billionaire's grief to climb higher, that his gentle care was nothing more than a calculated performance. Behind glass towers where Hudson's empire was built, the board of directors held hushed conversations that grew louder by the week. Investors worried about optics. Partners questioned the family image, and soon the pressure reached Hudson himself. He was told, bluntly, that if the company wished to remain untarnished, Eliot had to go. To them, it was simple math: remove the problem, restore the image, protect the brand. Eliot heard the whispers in the hallways, saw the way staff avoided his gaze, and felt the walls closing in. The decision seemed inevitable. He packed a small bag quietly, unwilling to risk further chaos. His plan was to disappear before the storm consumed him completely, to leave behind the nursery that had become both his sanctuary and his torment. But the moment of departure collided with a force stronger than fear: 5 small voices crying in unison, reaching for him as though they sensed abandonment. Their tiny hands grasped the air, their faces streaked with tears, their bodies trembling with panic. Eliot froze. He could not silence their grief with promises of return, because children do not understand timing, strategy, or reputation. They only understand presence and absence. And in that moment, their cries anchored him more firmly than any chain. Eliot straightened his back. The humiliation had already burned through him, but surrender would mean teaching these children that love bows before public opinion. He would not allow that. That evening, as the mansion fell into uneasy quiet, he opened his laptop. For the first time, he turned the camera not toward Hudson's empire, but toward himself. He went live to a world eager to sneer. His voice, steady though weighted with exhaustion, filled the feed. I am not only a servant. I am the one who has held these children through sleepless nights. I know their first smiles, their fevers, their every breath, and I will not allow anyone to call them a burden, because they are not burdens, they are lives, deserving of dignity. The words traveled fast. Within minutes, comments flooded the screen. Some applauded his courage, declaring him a hero in plain clothes. Others doubled down on ridicule, accusing him of manipulation. The digital square became a battlefield, dividing strangers across continents into camps of defense and attack. Eliot had not cleared his name, but he had forced the world to see him not as a caricature, but as a man standing his ground. Hudson Vale watched in silence, his empire trembling under the weight of scandal. But for Eliot, the livestream was never about empire. It was about reclaiming his humanity in a world determined to strip it away. The lesson buried in this storm was that truth often begins as a whisper before it becomes a roar. And those who dare to stand, even when mocked, teach the next generation that dignity is not granted by wealth, nor revoked by ridicule. It is carried in the courage to stay present, especially when walking away seems easier. The storm Eliot Frost unleashed could not be contained by silence anymore. The board of Vale Technologies feared the empire might collapse under the weight of rumor and scandal. They made their move swiftly, hiring an elite legal team not to defend truth but to destroy a single man. They claimed Eliot's livestream was defamatory, an attack on Hudson Vale's image, and by extension, the stability of the corporation. The lawsuit became the weapon of choice, designed to bury him beneath paperwork, ridicule, and the public assumption of guilt. The hearing was set in a crowded courtroom, where cameras lined the aisles and commentators filled the air with the predictions. Reporters jostled for space, ready to capture the downfall of the so-called gay servant who dared to challenge a billionaire. Eliot walked in quietly, shoulders straight despite the weight of every lens turned on him. He was no longer invisible. He was spectacle. When the proceedings began, the attorneys for Vale Technologies attacked mercilessly. They painted him as a manipulator, a parasite feeding on Hudson's grief, a man whose only skill was clinging to children for sympathy. At one point, one of the lawyers leaned forward with a smirk and spat words that echoed across the chamber. What could a gay servant possibly know about the rights of a parent? The room tittered with cruel laughter, the sting of prejudice disguised as humor. Eliot did not flinch. He let the words hang in the air, then reached calmly into his folder. He placed a sealed envelope on the table, one that carried within it the weight of truth. The judge signaled him forward. Papers were unfolded, results read aloud. The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was thunder without sound. The DNA report left no room for argument. Eliot Frost was not simply a caretaker. He was the biological father of all 5 Vale children. Shock rippled through the gallery. Reporters scrambled for their phones, headlines already composing themselves. Gasps echoed like a wave. On the bench, Hudson Vale sat frozen. The man who once commanded boardrooms suddenly struck powerless by revelation. The myth of the perfect billionaire father collapsed in a single breath. The empire's story fractured. The children he had called his daughters were not bound to him by blood at all. The consequences spread like wildfire. Shareholders demanded explanations, journalists shouted questions, and the legal team faltered. Caught off guard by evidence no strategy could undo. Yet even as the world turned its gaze on Hudson, suspicion turned toward Eliot. Whispers filled the courtroom. Had he known all along? Was this his plan? A servant plotting to inherit an empire? Truth, once revealed, carried its own burden. Eliot stood alone in that storm, the weight of both vindication and accusation pressing equally on his chest. He had gained the recognition of fatherhood, yet at the cost of deeper mistrust. The paradox was cruel to claim his children. He had to endure the world painting him as opportunist. The moment revealed something greater than scandal. It exposed how quickly society confuses truth with agenda, how prejudice clings even in the face of undeniable proof. And it reminded all who watch that dignity in parenthood cannot be defined by wealth, by courtroom rhetoric, or even by bloodlines alone. It is revealed in this consistency of care, in the presence that never falters, and in the courage to claim love when the world calls it illegitimate. The gavel struck, but the noise did not end in that chamber. The world outside had already changed. Eliot Frost was no longer invisible, no longer a footnote to a billionaire's story. He was father, and with that truth came both salvation and peril. The world braced for war between the billionaire and the servant. Commentators predicted years of custody battles, legal warfare, and public humiliation. Some said Hudson Vale would crush Eliot Frost with the same precision he used to dismantle corporate rivals. Others whispered that Eliot, armed with truth, would strip Hudson of everything he cherished. The air was thick with anticipation for conflict. But when the judge turned toward Hudson, waiting for his rebuttal, the billionaire did something no one expected. He rose slowly, his face pale, not from anger but from realization. He looked at Eliot, the man society mocked, the man headlines scorned, and for the first time, his voice carried no arrogance, only surrender. Eliot did not deceive me, he said, each word measured, echoing in the chamber. He carried what I could not. He nurtured what I overlooked. He has been the father in blood, yes, but more importantly, the father in action. If I am their father on paper, then he is their father in truth. And I will not stand apart from that reality. I choose to stand beside it. Gasps filled the room. Journalists froze, pens suspended midair, as the narrative they had written crumbled before their eyes. Instead of a battle for dominance, Hudson proposed something unthinkable in the world of power and ego-shared parenthood. He urged the court to recognize Eliot as legal co-guardian, not as an intruder, but as equal. The judge, startled by unity where division was expected, conferred with counsel, then agreed. The ruling was entered. Eliot Frost, once dismissed as a nameless servant, now stood legally recognized as father of the Vale children. The cameras captured what would become an iconic image, Eliot stepping forward to gather the 5 girls into his arms, their small heads resting on his shoulders. Hudson placed a hand firmly on Eliot's back, not as an owner, not as a master, but as a partner in the only empire that mattered now, the empire of family. Outside, the crowd that had jeered fell silent. Headlines transformed overnight. From scandal to redemption, the billionaire and the servant who became fathers. The very voices that mocked now praised the courage of a man who refused to walk away, and the humility of another who chose to stand beside him. For Eliot, the victory was never about fame or wealth. It was about no longer hiding behind ridicule, no longer being dismissed as a shadow. It was about stepping fully into the role he had lived in silence for so long. The secret that once crushed him now became his liberation. And for the children, the outcome was even more profound. They would grow not under the banner of scandal, but under the strength of two men who, in different ways, chose them above all else. The moral was not written in courtroom transcripts or broadcast headlines. It was etched in the simple truth that love is not diminished by who gives it, but multiplied when two hearts choose to share it. Families are not defined by how they appear to the world, but by the courage to protect what is most fragile inside them. Now, I want to ask you, if you were in Hudson Vale's position, would you have had the courage to stand beside Eliot Frost rather than fight him, or would pride have driven you to destroy what love had built? This is Heart Stories, where stories of struggle, truth, and redemption live. If Eliot's journey moved you, don't just watch in silence. Subscribe, share this story, and leave a comment with one word: family, to show the world that love, in all its forms, is worth fighting for.